We're at the IS meeting in Amsterdam. We're here with Peter Gottfried Fawcett, who's a senior science advisor at UNAIDS, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us on yet another discussion on criminalization, because it is like we talked earlier, as a key focus of this conference. It appears that it is. I mean, I don't know whether we start out that way, but it certainly has generated that. And I think you've been involved in the press conference, so tell us what the upshot is here and some of the detail where you feel it's important.
Yeah. So a group of organizations, UNAIDS, but also the International AIDS Society, IAPAC, and the HIV Justice Network, brought together 19 top-class scientists and myself. There are 20 authors on the statement from around the world, top scientists, right, Professor Barry Sanusi, Professor Abdul Karim, I mean, people who are really at the top, and managed to get them to sit around a table, having gone through the literature on transmission and harms of HIV, to come up with the first international consensus statement that uses science to help courts when they're faced with prosecutions relating to HIV. So not specifically necessarily laws that are HIV laws, but people are getting prosecuted even under general laws, and often the courts are way behind with the scientific evidence, and therefore the decisions of the courts depend more really on the stigmatization of HIV and the demonization of HIV rather than on the science facts.
There's no relationship to anything. It's just basically a feeling or a tradition, a bad tradition.
I think it's because, when HIV came out,
people were scared.
There was no treatment. People were scared. It's true that almost everybody with HIV died at that stage. So it led to this notion that somebody who was being as reckless as to allow somebody else to become infected was more or less killing them. So two things have changed. First of all, we understand transmission better than we did, and we know that actually for each individual act the risk of HIV transmission varies from none to low at the highest, depending on a range of circumstances, including whether the person is on treatment, whether they're using a condom, etc., etc. And that if the court is well appraised of those things, it wouldn't end up saying that an offence had been committed. So, for instance, there are examples of people who are currently serving jail terms where the problem is that they did not disclose their HIV status. They themselves had an undetectable viral load, they used a condom, there was no chance of transmission of HIV, nor did the complainant become infected with HIV, and yet those people can be locked up for many years in some jurisdictions. And that seems a bizarre thing. I think many people wouldn't really realize that was going on at the moment. Equally, I think that the treatment of HIV has changed HIV from being a death sentence to being a manageable condition that people are managing with drugs. And so just as there's a difference between assault and grievous bodily harm and murder, so there's a difference in how a court should view HIV transmission in the era of effective treatment compared to in the era of no effective treatment. So the statement deals with both those aspects, and also with the aspect of our understanding of who infected whom. The phylogenetics of HIV, of which we've heard some good evidence at this conference. It's a complicated science. HIV, what's interesting about HIV to the scientists is the way it's constantly changing shape, and everyone has a cloud of different HIV viruses within them. So actually saying A passed the virus to B is difficult. It may be that actually B gave it to A, or that C gave it to A and B. Often difficult to know, or A gave it to C, gave it to B. So courts need to understand some of the complexities of these things if they're to be able to make reasonable and valid judgments. We're not, it's a statement by scientists. We're not really trying to, as it were, be advocates ourselves. We hope that it will be useful for advocacy, but we're trying to lay out the science of these things so that courts can make rational and sensible decisions. I hope that the outcome of that will be that there will be fewer prosecutions around HIV because most of them are not really justified.
Well, the partner study also did some science and testing, so you will know who infected who there, because they're ruling out their partner giving it to the other partner that it was somewhere else,
Yes.
outside the relationship.
And that was a nice example. If you look back through the presentation of the partner study, Alison Roger, when she presented it, she didn't even want to get into the details. She said in her oral presentation, she said, and those of you interested can see I used this program, and there were the complicated names of the systems up on her slide. It reinforces the point that this is a sort of a tricky area. But it can be done, but you need an expert. You need somebody who is actually expert in how to use phylogenetics, and not just someone saying, well, it's not the same as human DNA, for instance, which hardly changes. And if the DNA is there, it's there, and if it's not, it's not. So the forensic use of phylogenetics in HIV is a complex area.
A person that's trained and experienced.
Yes, you need someone who knows what they're talking about in the room.
So beyond this statement, how will this statement be used
So the statement is now, it has a life of its own, of course. We hope that it'll be widely disseminated. We're pleased that the conference and the International AIDS Society are raising its profile. UNAIDS will raise its profile through our communication departments and so on in order to put it out there. We hope that it will be used widely by courts when they're needing to call expert witnesses. It will also be used by advocacy organisations such as the HIV Justice Network to say, look, there's a good basis for this. So some countries, for instance, I heard already that in Idaho, the people who are trying to look at the laws that have led to people being imprisoned will already use this statement as part of their evidence that they present to the state governor, saying, well, look, this is what scientists from around the world are saying. That should come into your reflections on whether or not you want to try and alter laws, try and review cases and so on.
Are you going to try to respond to negative responses to this? Or do you just not acknowledge it? I mean, I don't know how they'll appear, but
let's see what the negative responses are.
Because there always will be some of that, but sometimes they're just out in left field.
So I think this is, we come at it from the basis of science.
Right. But they're science denialists too.
Yes, so science denialists we will get into.
You have a hard time arguing with them.
We're always going to lay out, this is the evidential basis that we can find.
Right.
You're right, there will be some people who are, I would say, off the mark in the way they want to attack the statement. The statement is not saying what is right and what is wrong. It's saying this is the science. Let the courts decide on the basis of the judicial process what is right and what is wrong.
Right. Well, it's exciting that this has gone down, and it seems to all be coming together, because I think everybody knows this is a real knot in the middle of the whole thing, that we can't proceed to go to zero undetectability if we can't get the people out of the stigma and the closets and all these places that they're hiding. Don't even want to get tested. It's dangerous for our world to try to get through this without decriminalization.
Yeah, we need approaches. We know that, and I think our report, the UNAIDS report this year, also clearly shows that the epidemic, we still have a way to go, and that HIV increasingly is residing in the populations that are the most difficult to reach. And the reasons that they're difficult to reach are often because of the issues that you've mentioned of stigmatization, of politicization, of criminalization. And of course that means we have to advocate for those things to change. We know what to do about some aspects of HIV. We know, for instance, for people who use drugs, that if you provide harm reduction services, HIV goes away. So if a country wants to get rid of HIV amongst people who use drugs, we do know what to do. So somehow the issue is to encourage those countries, by whatever means, to want to do something about HIV. And I think we will see outside sub-Saharan and particularly southern and East Africa, outside those areas, we can see that a larger and larger proportion of HIV is either occurring in people who are currently part of the key populations, men who have sex with men, transgender women, prisoners, people involved, people who sell sex workers, both male and female. I think I've mentioned them all. Check that I've gone through them, the key populations.
Yeah.
Or their clients or partners, or those people who are no longer engaged in people who no longer use drugs or who are no longer involved in sex work. If you like, they're retired from what they were doing, but they're still positive. So there was a very nice paper presented in the early part of this conference from Tim Brown, who produces the Asia epidemic model, showing an enormous preponderance of the HIV in Asia now can be linked more or less directly back to those key populations. So even when it appears to be in the general population, the model suggests that a lot of those people living with HIV, actually you can trace them back. Either they were a key population member themselves, or they were the sexual partner of a key population member. So this notion of general population is not a very strong, it's not a particularly useful, and I think we will see the epidemic going more and more that way. Whereas, in contrast, I think that the information that's coming out of Southern and East Africa is that actually new infections are going down.
Contrary to, say, for instance, Eastern Europe,
Yes.
certain Eastern Europe cities, and Russia, perfect example of the suppression of people getting access and feeling comfortable with their sexuality because of criminalization.
But in fact, contrary, yes, when you take the rest of the world, there's been, if you compare Sub-Saharan
either
Africa,
flat
the
or
rates
low,
going
yeah,
down. If you take the whole of the rest of the world in aggregate, we're not making progress.
Yeah.
The number of new infections is horribly flat.
Right.
And that, of course, hides things, because in some cities it's going down, in other parts of the
Right.
world it's going up,
Exactly.
but the aggregate is flat. Whereas in Southern Africa and East Africa, we are making progress. The number of new infections is falling. We had two very huge studies presented in the conference just today, the late breaker studies from Botswana, the Botswana Harvard project that's been randomly allocating communities to different approaches to try to maximize the amount of treatment. And they were able to show a 30% reduction in HIV incidence in the communities with the more aggressive treatment scale up. Despite the fact they've already got good treatment, they were going that sort of the last bit and managing to get an additional
Seems there's a
reduction.
direct correlation between the amount of effort that's put into the process and the results.
Usually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have to look for that, because that tells us where to apply the effort. It's not always true. We saw a couple of years ago the reports from the TASP trial in South Africa, where they were doing a similar thing of trying to encourage all the people in this community in KwaZulu-Natal, in half the communities at random, to get tested and start on treatment. And they found that actually, although they could get people tested, many people chose not to go on to treatment, probably again because of stigmatization and worries. It was a little time ago, maybe it would be different if they did the study again now. So they put a lot of effort in and sadly showed no difference at all in HIV. Similarly in Uganda and Kenya, the SEARCH project that released its results just today.
But the prevalence is very high in those countries. That's a challenge. Yeah.
Yes, but in Botswana, where they saw it, the prevalence is also very high, and they did see some success.
Okay.
So we need to unpick the details of why. I mean, I think the most important challenge is what you've just suggested, is checking that the effort we put in is repaid by seeing things change.
And that's what UNAIDS does.
And UNAIDS is absolutely
We
reviewing
talked to
the
two
things.
gentlemen that do that.
Sorry?
We talked to two gentlemen that do that
Yeah,
at UNAIDS.
we're working, exactly. So UNAIDS, not just UNAIDS, UNAIDS works with
Right.
all
Well,
its co-sponsors,
right,
the
but-
broad UNAIDS, sorry,
Partners or collaborators.
the whole, no, not our collaborators, our sponsors, the whole the whole UN system. UNAIDS is
okay.
there to help coordinate that. So it's not just UNAIDS, it's WHO, it's UNFPA, it's the other programs.
But it's important for our audience to know that there's gatekeepers and there's watchdogs and so forth, that this money is going very specifically and carefully to the right places.
I think there's a big focus on using the money effectively.
Because we have to, there's only so much.
The money is not going up. We need it to go up. We don't have enough money. It's also clear we do know what we should be doing. We know to some extent what it will cost to do what we need to do, and we don't see enough money to do it. So I think we do need to keep pushing. If we are on the cusp, we can nearly get rid of HIV, and if we fail now, it's going to come back. And we'll be back in the situation, time will go backwards. So
That would be a horrible circumstance.
a horrible scenario.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you doing the work that you're doing, and I wish all the good luck to you and collaborators in coordination with all the people and the actors and the people that are part of this massive process to hopefully reduce and eventually eliminate AIDS.
Thanks
Thank you
very
very much.
Thanks.